Hi, hello, and welcome back to the HII Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of the HII Method podcast and also the founder of the HII Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training champions for years. And they offer training and assessments in their facility as well as remote options available. And right now we are getting into wintertime. And this time of year is incredible with the layering challenges that we may face during this time of year. And it's not just related to changes in the temperature outside if it starts getting colder, maybe a little snowy, which I love personally. But some of those challenges during wintertime, especially for really just the majority of people, whether we want to openly admit it or not, is combinations of challenges with our mental health and also challenges with our immune system and with maybe being more susceptible to getting sick during this time of year. And there are a lot of factors at play during winter times in general that are going to have an impact on us and our overall health and functioning on a day-to-day basis. That's our physical and mental health and functioning on a regular recurring basis. Some of that is because of that change in the daylight, the amount of daylight we have during the daytime versus the nighttime hours. That's having an impact on us and our circadian rhythm. It's having an impact on our ability to actually stay awake and be alert during the daytime and actually get quality, full night of sleep if we're lucky at night and not needing to wake up with an alarm clock. But so all of these different challenges that we may have to face during wintertime. And like I said, those two areas that tend to impact all of us, whether we are aware of it or not, is with our mental health and with our physical health and our immune system. Now, cool topic that we're going to talk about today is where those two actually meet. And it's all within what I consider, or really what is considered the gut-brain axis, or that gut-brain connection. And so to even get started into this topic, because this is a huge topic with a whole lot of different pieces that all converge on this general theme of this connection between your brain and your gut. And so to try to simplify this, at least for the sake of today, and try to get the conversation going, kind of introduce those different pieces, trying to simplify the messaging here. So your gut-brain axis, if you think about it as this pathway for communication between your brain and your gut. So between what you're taking in and eating and actually digesting and absorbing and what that's doing within your body, but then also how that signals to the brain and vice versa, what your brain is signaling back down to your GI tract and to your gut. So there's a whole lot of various details that we can get into, but I want to keep this as I guess, as easy to digest as possible. No pun intended. I mean, there was a pun intended there. Let's be real here. But so if you think about, first of all, so if we talk about the gut and what the gut means and how to make sense of the gut, because we probably don't think about it on a regular basis. So your gut, your digestive system is not just an organ, but your gut also has its own ecosystem living within it. So it's kind of like this living entity, if you will, inside of you, and you are the host of this ecosystem. It's a little creepy to think about it, but it's also very cool. So if you want to consider this, so everything that you're taking in on a day-to-day basis, all the foods and fluids and supplements, everything that you are taking in, maybe everything that you are consciously aware of what you're taking in, maybe you're measuring and assessing and trying to do XYZ to make sure that you're taking in what you need to be taken in or how much you think you need to be taken in. Whether or not you properly and fully digest and absorb all of that is based on the health and integrity of your actual digestive system. So all of that work that you're doing on the front end may not actually give you the payoff that you're hoping for, or have you reaching that nutrient density, that nutrient capacity that you want to have for yourself, because there's this barrier, this kind of invisible barrier, and that is the actual health and integrity of your gut and how it's functioning. So if you think about your gut, so like I said, it's an organ and there's also an ecosystem within that organ. It's a living entity inside of you, whether you like that or not. So that organ is made up of this really thin tissue. It's a thin layer. It's a epithelial cell layer for your actual GI tract. And that layer of cells, it's very thin, like I said. So it's a single cell layer of tissue, if you want to think of tissue like that. And that tissue has a mucous membrane to help protect it. And then inside of that actual tract, which is a very long, I think it's like 23 or 25 feet long, and however if it's spread out, like spread out to lay flat, it's like the size of a basketball court, I think. So there's all these stats about how actually big and complex this thing is, but in reality, it's very intricately, almost like balled up and bundled up inside of you. So that layer of cell lining and that mucous membrane to protect it, it's protecting it because you have this living ecosystem of microbes that are living within that organ itself. So the organ itself is doing a lot of mechanical and chemical digestion and absorption of food and nutrients. And then you have this living ecosystem of all these microbes inside that are all coexisting with each other. First of all, there's a whole variety of different strains of these microbes, and they all coexist and live together. And they feed off of what you eat. And based off of what you are feeding them, they will give off a byproduct, and that could be a beneficial, positive byproduct for us, the host of them, or it could be something that is potentially toxic to us or to our cells, or something that can accumulate and create this cytotoxic environment. And so there's this dynamic exchange between us, the host, and this ecosystem that we are hosting, but also the integrity of the organ itself that is housing this ecosystem that needs to be very well protected and kept up with in a nice, healthy way, because it's so fragile and there's so much of it. It's a very wide, expansive lot of cells that are all bundled up, like I said, and there needs to be this natural, so it's flexible and vulnerable, but it's also strong, and it acts as a very strong barrier for you, a very strong protective mechanism, really. It's part of your immune system. Your gut plays a huge part of your immune system, and all those microbes too can help to combat any microbes coming in that are pathogenic, that are not what we want to be taking in. So you have this really unique function that is happening within your gut at all times. Now, some of the potential areas that we want to start paying attention to is, first of all, making sure that ecosystem that we have living inside of us, that we're feeding it what it needs to feed off of, so that way it can do what it needs to do. What it needs to do is a combination of helping to digest and absorb our food, helping to send signals to the brain, to the body, helping to protect us and our immune system from any potential pathogens. So we want to keep that ecosystem nice and happy and healthy and thriving. So we want to feed it what it needs to do its job. So that means taking in prebiotic fibers and adding also probiotic foods, so that way we are occasionally adding some of those nice healthy microbes into our system, especially if we've experienced or taken any kind of antibiotics in any kind of a recent period of time, because that will disrupt that entire ecosystem. So fun little fact for you, little story here about where you even get these microbes, because you just all of a sudden like are housing all these colonies of stuff, it's like, where do they come from? So you actually are, when you're born, through your mother, you are passed down these microbes into your system. So when you're born, you have your organs, and then you also have these living microbes that your mother passes down to you. So, oh, thanks, Mom. You get it from your mother. So you actually start to develop your unique ecosystem because of your mother and her ecosystem. So whatever her state of health, her state of functioning, her state of development in her health and state of functioning, that's being passed down to you. So you really do get it from your mother. So as you are developing and growing this ecosystem, this is very early on in life, your first couple of years, and as you're starting to introduce foods and different varieties of foods, you start to flourish and grow this ecosystem more and more until you have what is then your microbiome. And so that microbiome that you are born with and you develop during those early years of life, that becomes your microbiome that you have throughout your entire life. And your microbiome will change occasionally. Here and there, it will adapt to different changes in your life, different lifestyle changes, dietary changes. If you are taking, like I said, antibiotics at any point in time, that's going to shift your microbiome a bit, but it's not going to completely wipe everything out. You have a microbiome for a reason because it's a very important part of you. So don't believe all the hype about, needing to take supplements in order to get all of these probiotics and take all these excess things in, because you do already have it. You just need to take care of it. You already have everything you need. We just got to turn our focus towards what it needs. So that microbiome, that happy microbiome, like I said, feeding it with those prebiotic fibers. So all of your high fiber carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables, grains and legumes. If you have a variety of those, a nice, diverse, expansive variety of foods throughout your day-to-day, you are going to help feed that nice, expansive, diverse community, that ecosystem that needs to be diverse and needs to work well with each other and thrive so that way it can give back to you. So the more that you have that variety and that natural diversity within your diet, when it comes to grains and legumes and fruits and vegetables, that is giving you that much more added advantage on feeding your microbiome with something that they actually need and want and will then do some positive work for you. Now, taking care of the organ itself, the actual gut, this is where, so there's a whole lot of circulating information out there regarding what it means to have, let's say, an imbalance or a dysfunction within your gut. And some of it is centered on your gut microbiome, what we just talked about with that actual ecosystem. And some of it is based on the actual gut lining and the integrity of that gut. So because that gut lining is so fragile, it's that one cell layer thick, it's very fragile, it's very flexible, but it needs to be very strong and very supportive to us because it's acting as a strong protective mechanism and also acting as this specialized gate. It will allow certain things to absorb where they need to absorb, but if it becomes impaired, if the integrity becomes impaired, if the gut lining gets stretched or wounded in any way, then all of a sudden you have items from inside of the intestines leaking out through the gut lining into the rest of your abdominal cavity. And this is what is called leaky gut syndrome. So there's a lot of hype about leaky gut syndrome, and I think some people might think it has to do with like anal discharge or something. It is not that end of the spectrum. It is what is happening internally within your intestinal lining leaking through into your abdominal cavity. And when this happens, those items that were protected from you, the rest of you, are now seen as a threat because they've crossed through that barrier. They've crossed through what was that protective barrier. So now it's seen as a threat. And so your immune system will start to pick up on this, that there's a potential threat, and it will identify it and do what it needs to try to alleviate the threat. And sometimes that can look like developing these antibodies to these different food proteins that are leaking through. And so you can all of a sudden start to have allergy symptoms related to like any kind of allergy symptoms, whether it is an actual food allergy, like an actual anaphylactic allergy reaction, or if it's more of a skin allergy. A lot of this can be tied back to what is happening within the gut, where that primary point of your immune system functioning is impaired. Your actual immune functions are heightened, really. You have this almost hypersensitivity now to anything that you're interacting with because your immune system has been on high alert trying to help to combat all of these potential pathogens leaking into your abdominal cavity. So there's a very strong reason for us to protect the gut lining and the integrity of that gut lining, as well as to protect that ecosystem that is living within that gut. So we want to protect both. Now, like I said, the foods that you're taking in can help to protect the ecosystem. Similar to that, the gut lining can also be protected based on different foods that you are taking in and also different lifestyle factors. Now, here's something that I don't think gets enough attention, is the fact that a lot of the reasons for that gut lining to be impaired and to have any kind of dysfunction a lot of it comes from stress. Believe it or not, there is a relationship between stress and your stress response with the integrity of the gut lining, but it also starts to erode and take away that mucosal lining that helps to protect the gut lining. So the gut lining gets that much more irritated. So if you think about it, like the more stressed out you are, the more irritated you feel. Well, yeah, the same thing is happening within your gut. And the reason why stress impacts the gut so heavily is because of this entire topic where I started off saying is because of that gut-brain connection. Because you actually have this bidirectional communication between your gut and your brain. And the primary highway for this communication is your vagus nerve. So your vagus nerve plays important roles in regulating your autonomic nervous system, which separates into, if you want to think of it as your sympathetic nervous system, your sympathetic activity, and your parasympathetic or your rest and digest. So sympathetic is your fight or flight kind of responses, and parasympathetic is rest and digest. And a lot of this is controlled through your vagus nerve, which is, like I said, this big highway of communication between your brain and your gut. So I even just said in those descriptions, so fight or flight, when you're in a sympathetic state, so when you're in that higher stress state, your body's prepared to move, to fight, to run away, to do something that is requiring you to not eat and digest. Instead, you're doing the opposite. And during that parasympathetic state, that is when you also have blood shunting. So that's blood moving away from your GI tract out to your muscles to help support that muscle activity to get you going and get you moving away from a threat or predator. So that is all your sympathetic state. It's impacting your digestive system in that way where it's decreasing how well you would digest and absorb because you need instead that energy and that blood specifically channeled for another purpose. Now, the other side of the equation, that parasympathetic state, that rest and digest, that is when there's no threat around us. We can actually rest. This is when you are in that either meditative state, the sleep state. This is when you are in a full relaxation, full recovery state. This is where your body is preparing itself through those recovery it's allowing itself to grow and to heal and to adapt to what it experienced when it was in that sympathetic state. So that parasympathetic state, that is when you have all of that the blood is right back in your digestive system, and now you can properly digest and absorb food the way that your GI tract is prepared to do so. So you have this separation of how your digestive system functions based on your stress and what you are being exposed to when it comes to overall stressors and how you are responding to those stressors. So if you are in let's say it's a very acute high stress situation, so you all of a sudden are in a very acute sympathetic state, then you immediately have this decrease in how well you digest food, right? Now, on the flip side of that, or actually to expand on that, if instead of that acute stress situation, if it's a chronic stress situation, so you are just constantly exposed to stressors throughout your day, or you're constantly at a deficit on the amount of recovery that your body actually needs in order to fully move through and make sense of and get better from the stress that it did experience. So if you're in this chronic stress state, your body's at a disadvantage. And because you are in that chronic stress state, so you're still experiencing this sympathetic activation, that's actually impairing your digestive functions. So if you're going throughout your day-to-day, even though you're not immediately on high alert to go run or fight a predator, if you're just going through your normal day-to-day, going to work and you're trying to eat lunch, on your lunch break, you go home and you're stressed out because you got all these other things to do, that entire day of having this slightly elevated stress response is immediately impairing your digestive functions. And so that stress starts to break away and tear down the actual mucosal lining and the gut lining and the integrity of the gut lining, and it starts to disrupt your microbiome as well. So all of the important functions of your gut start to go out the window, basically, when you're in this state of chronic stress. And on top of all of that, because you have this bidirectional communication between your brain and your gut, so you actually have, your gut has a ton of neurological connections, and it actually has neurons within the gut that receive a whole lot of neurological signaling. So you do in fact have this neurological functioning within your gut. It actually has its own nervous system. It's the enteric nervous system. But so from that, you're also receiving this stress response signaling, telling your gut really at all times, like, hey, don't fully relax yet. We still got other things to do. Don't fully relax yet. So your gut is continually getting this signaling that it needs to reduce its functions because it needs to stay on high alert to run away, right? So this kind of cycle of chronic stress response and what it's doing on your body, on your physiology, and on the gut lining, the gut integrity, it's then also going to impact your immune system functioning. It's going to impact your physical health. It's going to impact your mental health. You have all of these varying paths that start to become more and more impaired over time because you are, not only are you experiencing this high stress state and not recovering from it, but you're also depleting yourself, continually depleting yourself of what you do need in order to fully recover and rebuild and repair from what you have experienced. So going back to what I said at the beginning, all of the foods and supplements and everything that you're taking in to try to meet your needs and get your body what it needs, you're that much more likely to not be receiving that, and to therefore be less fully recovered, less fully rebuilt, less fully regenerated in the way that you needed to if you were instead actually fully absorbing what you were taking in. And it's because you have that silent barrier within your gut. So I know we just talked about a whole bunch of stuff, and it's sometimes hard to try to picture it if it's being just explained the way I'm explaining it. And sometimes we need diagrams and everything. But hopefully that at least started to trigger in your mind some of the varieties of ways in which our gut-brain connection impacts us in multiple ways, and why we need to start to really focus on what it means to identify that stress and that stress response that we may be continually having, or that we may be living in a continual stress response, and the impact that has on our actual physiology and how our body is functioning on a day-to-day basis. Because knowing that about ourselves would change then the decisions we make outside of us, the things that we do have control over. We can start to make those decisions differently and in a way that is going to help improve us, knowing that we are needing to make those types of changes. So some of the ways that we can start to identify these different factors, there's actually a couple. So, and these are a couple ways that I'm actually putting together some research trials as I begin work on a PhD in neuroscience. Some of the research trials that I'm going to be putting together are related to this specific topic itself, but also, specifically, so identifying what that stress response looks like in terms of a biomarker. So your gut, like I said, there's this communication that is always happening. And that communication is not just neurological communication, it's also hormonal communication. And it's this release of these byproducts or biomarkers or an end product. So your gut actually releases a biomarker that is related to stress. It's related to stress, but it's a biomarker based on that mucosal lining being degraded. And so you form then this antibody. And so when you can detect this antibody through this biomarker assessment, then you can figure that, okay, if the mucosal lining is being depleted this much, it means that there is this heightened state of stress. So we have now a clear view that your body is physiologically responding to stress. So whether you realize it or not, there's some silent stress that is, or silent, downside of stress that is happening in your body, and we can identify it in this biomarker. So once you can identify that, then you start to identify what stress actually looks like for you. Because whether or not you realize that you are experiencing stress, your body does. And so by identifying that biomarker first, we have that first clue that your body is responding to stress, whether or not you realize it. So that comes to the next point then of why wouldn't you realize that you're experiencing stress? So what we have when it comes to stress, or really just when it comes to what you're exposed to and experiencing on a regular basis, you have what I consider to be, well, there's workload that you may have heard about, especially in the sports science community. There's the topic or the concept of monitoring workload, and it's all based on your physical or the physiological workload. So like how much weight you're lifting, or how much overall volume or intensity that you are working out in and with. That's considered like your physical workload. But you also have a cerebral workload. This is where I think the coolest, like probably next, I don't know, probably 10 years, 20 years, however many decades of research that I'm going to do on this topic, is your cerebral workload. And this is the overall accumulation of what you are experiencing psychologically. So physically you have that workload, but you also have a psychological workload. And like I said, cerebral workload. So if you want to think of it like this, the type of work that human beings engage in now, for the most part, is cerebral in nature. It's based on higher level thinking, on strategizing, on creativity, on communication, on relationships, on trying to learn and understand something and then trying to translate it back out like I'm doing right now. So the large majority of what we do and engage in on a day-to-day basis is cerebral in nature. But we also are constantly, our brain is constantly making sense of us and others and the world around us at all times by receiving sensory input and trying to make sense of it. So your brain never stops. Your brain doesn't just shut off. So if you've ever wondered why maybe working a certain job for, let's say if you're working like a 40-hour work week, for instance, and what you do for work is cerebral in nature, you may find that you're not actually working 40 hours. You can't. There's no way. Your brain doesn't do that. But what your brain does do is it works nonstop. It's just working in different ways. It's working in a variety of different ways. You just are not always consciously aware of it. So you might be consciously aware of the 10 hours in the week that you actually did cerebral work. You're not consciously aware of the ongoing 24 hours a day, maybe not 24 hours a day, but your brain really is constantly doing work in some way. What that means for you though, as the rest of the body and as the conscious human being that you are. So like I said, you're not always aware of this stress when it's occurring because it's constantly occurring and your brain is just constantly doing or analyzing or experiencing or projecting or doing. It's constantly in work mode, and that cerebral workload never stops. What we need to do though is start to understand what it actually means and what it looks like. So this is where, and I don't want to go into too much detail because like I said, this is going to be the next decade, if not more, of research that I'm going to dive into and start to really unpack those layers of how we identify cerebral workload in people. Once we can identify, for instance, if we can identify for you what cerebral workload looks like for you, or really how your body is responding to the cerebral workload that you do have, then we can start to make decisions about what and where you choose to place your focus and your energy. So if you can imagine the change in your work productivity, first of all, and in being able to accomplish a goal because you actually put a realistic timeline and expectations forward, knowing that your cerebral workload and how your body responds to it is in a certain place. And so now you can then plug away at identifying how to make those day-to-day decisions so that way you are continuing to acknowledge your own personal capacity, your ability to actually perform well in a way that is meaningful, that you want to be doing, and not instead depleting yourself because you're putting everything out there and not knowing why you're getting any further along. So yeah, huge topic. Like I said, it started off with the gut-brain axis, but then it's going up to just the full brain cerebral workload. But it does tie back then to identifying. So once we know what stress is and how to identify your cerebral workload, how to work with that and start to adjust your decisions, adjust your workload, your expectations, your day-to-day chores and responsibilities, start making adjustments in what you're exposed to or experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And then we can continue to track from that biomarker in your gut to see how your body is responding to that. And we'll start to see and start to track that your stress response, your body's physiological stress response, is now responding positively to these changes we're making based on just your cerebral workload or the psychological decisions or psychological work that we are putting forth for you, and how your body's responding to it. And so it ties back not just then to the gut-brain connection, but also that mind-body connection. And so it takes what is maybe a very high sciencey concept and translates it over to maybe more psychological or socially acceptable concept of the mind-body connection. So I get so jazzed when I talk about this and just start to put the pieces together of where this can go, starting from what we do know. And so, yeah, if you are interested in learning more and getting more updates and staying up to date on that, then definitely click the link in the show notes so that you can sign up for the email list, and I will send out as regular as possible newsletters showing those updates on not only what the findings are up to this point in time, but then as I get further along in these research trials, I'm going to need to start recruiting recruits. I'm going to need to start recruiting participants who want to actually help in this effort to identify these different pieces of the puzzle. So if you're interested in that, like I said, click the link in the show notes. Otherwise, for the sake of today, if anything, hopefully the big takeaway is to know that first of all, you're not crazy for having certain anxious stomach or anything. You can blame your mother that you got it from your mother. But that if anything, there's probably a whole lot more that is going on that maybe you're just not consciously aware of, but that we do have the ability to start identifying those things and start working with them. And instead of trying to then force your body to respond in a certain way or feeling bad that you're not where you want to be on a certain goal, we can start to instead identify where you're at and how you're responding to everything that's happening around you, and start to take care of your gut lining, start to take care of that ecosystem that you're playing host to, and start to really take care of the cerebral workload that you are experiencing and exposed to, because that is truly what is setting you either on the path to success towards your goal, or it could be hindering your further progress. So yeah, other than that, hopefully that was, a nice high level view, I guess, of mind, body, and the gut brain connection. So hopefully the next time that we chat, you'll have a little bit more of that nice relationship with your gut, and you feel like you can actually identify some things within you that maybe you want to start working on. But all right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.